Is that what you mean?
No, may I say what I mean myself in my own form of words? I think Americans have, I think it's a friendly habit of trying to help a person think for himself, but I'd rather do my own composition, if I may.
Mr. Lee was a young leader of a newly established country at this time, but his wisdom was beyond his age. Having been educated in Western institutions, he had great knowledge about Western news media and how they operated. Here, Mr. Lee is talking with American journalists, and the way he expresses his views without falling into any traps is a true masterclass.
Our guest today on Meet the Press is the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, who arrived this week for an official visit to President Johnson. We'll have the first questions now from Pauline Frederick of NBC News.
Mr. Prime Minister, you said in Washington that Americans are powerful. All the world is too painfully aware. But this power should be controlled. The United States should be restrained. Do you feel American power is controlled or used with restraint in Vietnam?
As of now?
Yes.
I don't want to engage in your domestic dispute, and I'm not a general or an admiral,
But you're a nation.
Yes, I would like to see a great deal more caution, a more selective exercise of your enormous range of weapons that you've got, and more brains and feet, preferably Vietnamese brains and feet, rather than more power and gadgetry.
Well, to be more specific, North Vietnam is less than 1/4 the size of Texas. It's now being bombed at the level that the bombing was carried on in World War II, and has been bombed for almost 3 years. Do you believe that this bombing is controlled or restrained use of power?
That's like asking me whether I've stopped beating my wife. I mean, I'd never beat my wife.
Well, let me ask you this. 47 heads of delegations in the United Nations, many of them foreign ministers, said in this General Assembly, American bombing of North Vietnam should be ended unconditionally. Do you agree with them?
Well, that depends who the 47 heads are.
Well, I'm sure
are
you
they
know,
from
sir.
Africa, from Asia, from Western Europe,
They were from all over
Eastern
the world.
Europe?
They were from all over the world.
Well, as I understand it, there are about, what, 120 members?
22.
122 members, so that's 47. Well, I wasn't there, but I mean, my colleague, Mr. Rajaratnam, Foreign Minister, is attending the United Nations, and I think he's going to say something on Vietnam. I don't want on the bombing and all the other problems about Vietnam, and I think bombing is one of the minor problems about Vietnam.
Well,
But if I may answer you this, he said it is a bothersome question.
but do you feel the bombing should be stopped? Would this help to get Hanoi to the conference table?
I think the bombing could be reduced and even stopped without any decisive change in the course of the war, but I think it does not follow that because you stop bombing, you'll have the North Vietnamese government to the conference table. Why should they go to the conference table? To help President Johnson win the elections? Do they love him? You know, Mr. Khrushchev said that he helped President Kennedy win by not seeing Mr. Nixon.
In other words, are you saying that if the North Vietnamese should come to the conference table and there would be a settlement, that President Johnson would win the next election? And by the same token, would he lose if there is not a peace settlement?
I don't think it's as simple as that. I mean, you're putting words in, you're putting a form of words in such a tight and I think imprecise way, really, because the world is not so simple. It's not black and white. If they were to stop bombing, or you were to stop bombing, and if Hanoi were to meet with your president, it doesn't mean that there will be a settlement before the timetable for your presidential elections. And things can become very complicated, really, if it weren't. So I really don't want to go into all the intricacies, because it can take so many twists and turns, as Panmunjom did. So all I would like to say as an outsider is, will we all, in the name of humanity and for the sake of human civilization, take great care that there is no miscalculation on the reactions not only of the North Vietnamese, but of the Russians and of the Chinese, because there must be a point at which they must react.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We'll be back with Meet the Press and more questions for our guest, the Prime Minister of Singapore. But first, this message.
Now back to Meet the Press, an unrehearsed press conference. Please remember, questions of the panel members do not necessarily reflect their own point of view. Here is our moderator, Edwin Newman.
Resuming our interview, our guest today on Meet the Press is the Prime Minister of the Republic of Singapore, Kuan Yew. You've just met Pauline Frederick of NBC News. The other reporters on our panel are Roland Evans of the Chicago Sun-Times, Seymour Topping of the New York Times, and Crosby Noyes of the Washington Evening Star. Lawrence E. Spivak, permanent member of the Meet the Press panel, will be back next Sunday. We'll continue the questions now with Mr. Evans.
Mr. Prime Minister, you said in a recent speech, quote, "The wrong kind of conclusion to the mess in Vietnam can absolutely unscramble the whole lot of us in Southeast Asia." What did you mean by unscramble the whole lot of us?
Well, one of the problems in Southeast Asia is that it consists of relatively new and fragile independent nations. They've just become independent since the Second World War. And the great problem is the will to resist. And it melts very easily because people, particularly in the world over, they want to be on the winning side. But in Southeast Asia, because they are small countries, because big armies have come, Europeans came, the Japanese came, you know, you bend with the wind like the bamboo, as the Chinese saying goes. And if it looks as if the east wind is growing stronger than the west wind, then people start bending that away even before the wind comes.
What you're saying, sir, if I understand, is that the American position of force and resistance to this east wind is essential to give your country and these other newly independent countries a bulwark behind which you can develop your independence. Is that what you mean?
No, may I say what I mean myself in my own form of words? I think Americans have, I think it's a friendly habit of trying to help a person think for himself, but I'd rather do my own composition, if I may. You have adopted this position in Vietnam. In 1954, you never asked the rest of Southeast Asia, and we were not consulted. You decided again in 1956 that Diem should not have free elections because, or he didn't want to have free elections, and you supported him because elections couldn't be free, and I've read all of the semantics about what is free and unfree. You decided in 1961, when things got a little bit difficult for Diem, to put in American advisors. And by 1963, at the end of 63, you had 25,000 American advisors in the Kennedy administration. Now, you had your last chance when Diem got knocked down by a bus, or perhaps it was a tank, and you could have got out and said to the generals, well, we'll help you, guns, food, uniforms, pay for the troops. But you decided, rightly or wrongly, to go in. And now this is 1967. And it's no use asking me now, for my opinion, what you should have done before. All I can say is, we've got to live with today, not with what might have been day before yesterday. And as of today, the Field Marshal of Thailand says, Critic, and he's saying it to his own people, that they are going to fight in Vietnam, not in Thailand. Well, I take that to mean that if that is gone, he's going to anticipate history, and you know, the Thais have this great sense of the future, and as good anticipators of history, if they make the kind of adjustments in their postures arising out of what they think is a failure in Vietnam, well, I don't think the Tunku in West Malaysia has got very many years, in spite of all his armed forces. And then they've got me by the throat.
Mr. Topping.
Well, if I may again do what my predecessors here have done, recall a speech you have made. Some years ago you said, the Vietnam experience shows that however massive the military cover, however enormous the economic assistance, if the leaders of the people in whose name and whose behalf military cover and economic aid are being given do not set out to secure their own salvation, the end result still is perdition, both for the helper and the helped. Speaking as an Asian, do you think the South Vietnamese are helping themselves enough, or are we here in the United States headed for perdition with our allies?
Well, you're asking me a very difficult question. I'm not making any direct contribution in Vietnam, and I think if I were a North Vietnamese, I'd resent the Prime Minister of Singapore passing judgment on the effort of the South Vietnamese, but I think they wouldn't mind my saying that the world will be a much better place if it's not Mr. Rusk explaining what this is all about, but either their president or their vice president, or better still, a new figure in a prime minister. You know?
Yes.
Forward-looking.
Of South Vietnam.
Forward-looking, independent, determined, and most important, sincere and honest.
Mr. Lee was truly amazing. Leaders like him are really hard to come by. It's as our luck that we can watch such genius. To watch more brilliance of Mr. Lee, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching.